Hello everyone, welcome back. It's been a while since my last Flashback Friday video, so I'm going to pick up the baton today and look at another classic Kenner Power of the Force 2 Star Wars vehicle. And today it's none other than the TIE Fighter, which is actually one of the very earliest vehicle releases in this revamped Power of the Force 2 line. So without further ado, let's kick off by taking a look at the packaging. Straight off the bat, you can tell that this is early days for the Power of the Force 2 line because of that red lightsaber branding in the background. Only the first sort of couple of waves really had this branding. Afterwards, they shook this up and changed it to the green lightsaber effect that was pretty much stay with the series until it got revamped by Hasbro some years later. So yeah, we have that fantastic lightsaber branding. I happen to really like this. I have great affection for these toys, although it does look very, very simple by today's standards. At the time, I thought this was absolutely magical and mesmerizing and very, very exciting. Of course, we have the Darth Vader helmet in the upper left-hand corner of the box there. We have the Star Wars logo, and then we have this fantastic image of the TIE Fighter. And what's unusual here is that usually they have an image of the toy itself, and what they have here actually looks to be like one of the models from the film. There's a lot more detail than we'll see actually on the toy, and it just looks a lot more authentic to what we see on screen, which is kind of unusual, which makes me wonder whether maybe they mocked up this packaging before they actually had an in-hand prototype, or maybe this was the prototype, I'm not sure. But either way, it still looks really, really dramatic. It looks very, very cool and makes a great display piece all on its own. In terms of the side panels, we do just see a smaller condensed version, slightly rearranged version of the same images that we see on the front of the packaging, so you can store this on your shelf if you wish and stack it up, and it still looks fairly presentable. And then if we look at the back of the packaging, we have an actual image of the toy itself, and of course the main focus here is on the action feature. There's a lot of small text around this packaging. Then we have this rather interesting image of the Stormtrooper being placed inside the cockpit. Of course, this is just to highlight that you can put figures inside here, although as we all know, a Stormtrooper is probably not appropriate to be flying a TIE Fighter, but at this point in the line, they hadn't actually produced a TIE Fighter pilot, which is interesting. That would come a little bit later. So at this stage in the game, you only had a Stormtrooper to play with, which is kind of unusual. And then at the bottom of the packaging, of course, we can see the other vehicles that were released as part of this initial wave. We have the Landspeeder and we have the X-Wing, and I've covered both of these vehicles in previous videos on the channel. Now, the toy itself comes in three pieces: the central midriff and then the two wings that clip into place, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later because it is linked to the action feature, of course. Now, you can see that mine is actually discoloured a little bit over the years, so the blue doesn't quite match really, but this was a consistent colouring when it was brand new. Now, in terms of the detail, it looks quite nice, but there's not an awful lot here to draw the eye. It's fairly accurate to what we see on screen, but there could have been a little bit more, and indeed future releases upgrades would include a little bit more detail for us to look at. But you can see some rivets and nuts and bolts and things, but it does look very plastic. It has that very plasticky kind of feel, and it doesn't have a lot when it comes to paint apps or shadowing or shading or anything like that. So it does feel a little bit basic, a bit bare bones, which is unfortunate. Where we do see a little bit more detail and a little bit more colour though is actually in the central cockpit itself. Now, the inner ring, as you can see, is a slightly different plastic. This is a grey rather than the blue, which is great because it kind of gives it this extra tone, a little bit more depth and dimension, which is quite nice. And then of course we have the two sort of laser cannons we can see with just very faint yellow circles there, which adds a little splash of colour. It would have been nice to have been a bit more here, and I'm not sure whether this should have been green rather than yellow, but hey, I'm pleased to have something rather than nothing here. And then of course on the interior of the cockpit we can see that sticker there that kind of highlights the I guess the wiring of what's inside, which actually looks really cool and is quite colourful, and pleasingly you can see this quite easily through that viewport there in the cockpit, which is great because it just gives it that splash of colour that just gives it a little bit more life and vitality, which is really nice to see. Now, you might be wondering how this vehicle compares when it comes to scaling, and I'm pleased to say it actually looks pretty good. I wouldn't say it's very accurate, but this is quite nice. I've actually got the TIE Fighter pilot, which came a little bit later on in the series, and put it next to the vehicle, and you can see that this looks pretty good actually. This is quite a nice scaling for the figure against the ship itself. And as you would expect, the cockpit does of course open up. There's a top folding lid that just clips into place and just opens up here, and of course we can see inside the cockpit. Now, the basic seat itself isn't too exciting, But we do get to see a little bit more of that central sticker that we saw through the viewport. This time we can see that it wraps all the way around into the seat itself, and we actually have a little bit more detail here. So yes, there's some more wires and bits and pieces, but we can see there are 3 view screens, 3 targeting screens that the TIE Fighter pilot can navigate when he's flying the vehicle, which is pretty cool. Of course, adding your TIE Fighter pilot to the cockpit is simplicity itself. You simply fold up the legs, put the figure inside, and just seat him into that cockpit seat there, and relatively straightforward. It just slots in, which is pretty cool. Now, the one sad thing is that you can't really see the pilot through the glass. You have to be really up close to it to actually see him, and it's a shame you can't see him from a distance. And although the figure doesn't come with the TIE Fighter, it makes sense to actually have a look at the pilot figure whilst we're here. And I have to say, I really like this figure. I think they did a really good job with him. For a character that is essentially all one tone, just that black outfit, this could have been quite dull and a bit boring as an action figure, but it works really well here because there's actually different tones of black. They've got the matte black for the main body, and then they have these highlighted glossy bits of black on the gloves and on the belt and on the boots, which actually give it a little bit more depth. Also, we see some really fine paint here as well, which is really neatly applied. We see a bit of silver on the belt. Of course, we have the Imperial logo on the shoulders and on the top of the helmet there, which looks really good. And then we actually have it in the mask as well, where we see silver, red, blue, and none of it really has smudged or bled anywhere, which is really cool. And he has 6 points of articulation, 1 swivel at the head there, allowing the head to spin from side to side. He has a swivel at the shoulder, allowing those arms to lift up and down. There's a swivel at the waist, allowing it to move from side to side. And then, of course, there's 1 in the legs as well, allowing the leg to lift up and down. Now, of course, it wouldn't be a 90s toy if it didn't have an action feature, and the TIE Fighter is no exception, because the wings will blow off when it's been in battle by simply depressing the 2 side wing nodules. You press them in and boom, the wings fly off, because of course they are spring-loaded. Now, putting these back together is really easy. They simply slide into place, and again, the springs lock it in place there until you're ready to explode it again. And that, as they say, is that. There's not much else to talk about, I don't think. I've missed anything here. It's quite a simple toy. Obviously, it was one of the first vehicles, so I suppose we were testing the market at this point. And of course, in and of itself, it is actually an updated version of the Power of the Force 1 line, all the way back in the 1980s. Of course, this wasn't the only TIE Fighter we got in this line. In fact, we got a really cool Darth Vader's special TIE Fighter, which I have covered on the channel, and I'll put a link to that above. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.